So just as a tiny bit of introduction, mentorship can be defined in a lot of different ways. But the way I think about it anyway is that it encompasses a lot of things. Mentors can be your advisors or PIs who are formally responsible for your academic progress. It can be supporters of your personal and professional endeavors, teachers, even trainers. Maybe you have sponsors and allies. Maybe you have academic role models as future faculty and leaders beyond the academy, really anyone who you can find who can help you reach your professional goals. So on the flip side, we expect you, our students, to weave together the network you need of resources and advisors so that you can pursue your intellectual and professional goals. And your needs from mentors will vary, of course, across your disciplines and the type of degree you're working on, as well as where you are in your program. What you need as a beginning student will change over time as you make progress. However, there are some things, some shared values and goals and responsibilities that really underpin all effective mentorship relationships. And those include the need to be self-directed, to be really intrinsically motivated, and to be able to persevere through rough spots, because we all have those. And if you can do that and reach out, you can definitely find supportive scholars and friends to make your graduate education wonderful in a collaborative way. You are definitely not alone. Yale is teeming with advisors and mentors, and that includes faculty, of course, but also deans and staff, advanced students, peers. Really, this is a people-to-people endeavor we're doing, and you should tap into all the help you can get. So today, we're focusing on a particular type of mentorship, and that's exemplified in the grad school by our annual Graduate Mentor Awards. And these celebrate faculty members who have been outstanding teachers and advisors of graduate students. And the 3 faculty members who are here today on the panel are all past winners of the Graduate Mentor Award, which means they were nominated by their current or past or both mentees for this award for their exemplary behaviors. So they really exemplify the important qualities to which all graduate teachers and faculty mentors should aspire. So just brief introductions. Gary Brudvig is the Silliman Professor of Chemistry. And Professor Brudvig's students have remarked that somehow he manages to, sorry, I lost my place. I'm moving my screen around. Somehow he manages to be inspiring and scientifically challenging at the same time without being intimidating or demanding. He allows his mentees to use their time in graduate school to develop as scientists and people in the ways we find most valuable. One student wrote, quote, and this is a quote, "Of course, the chemistry is always the main goal, but Gary also encourages students to spend time taking extra classes, gaining teaching skills, and leading outreach efforts. I think the best way to sum up what makes Gary such a great advisor and mentor is that he allows for each of his students to have the flexibility to follow their own passions." So Gary, thanks for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Next, Kelly Shue is Professor of Finance at the School of Management. Professor Shue is known to go above and beyond to support her Ph.D. advisees. Students note that she cares deeply about their personal and professional success and does everything she can to help them reach their full potential as scholars. One student remarked, quote, "In a year when many academic conferences have been canceled or gone virtual, Professor Shue tried to make up for the lost networking opportunities by connecting students with other faculty members who do work in the same fields. She will go the extra mile for her advisees." Thanks for being here, and thanks for being for all of that. And our third faculty member here with us today is Joanne Meyerowitz, who's the Arthur Unobskey Professor of History and Professor of American Studies. Professor Meyerowitz's students esteem her as a dream advisor who teaches students to read history while sharpening their abilities to identify trends in historical scholarship. One nominator wrote that she is, quote, timely and thoughtful in her engagement with student work, frank about the rewards and difficulties of the academic job market, and consistently helpful in directing her students toward resources and opportunities to develop their scholarship and intellectual community. So thank you, all three of you, as exceptional mentors, for providing insights today to students and anyone else who's tuned in. We are lucky to have you here. Thank you for doing it. So now what I'd like to do is hand the floor over to Assistant Dean for Graduate Student Life, Matthew Tanico, who will moderate the discussion. So please enjoy, everyone.
Thank you, Lynn. I just want to reiterate Dean Cooley's gratitude for our panelists' participation this afternoon. So we'll start with a few questions that we've prepared in advance for our panelists, and we'll reserve the latter part of the panel for Q&A from the audience. So feel free to put questions in the chat. I'll do my best to include questions as they come up in the discussion. But you can also save questions till the end and use the raise hand feature to ask those live. So I wanted to say that the word mentor takes its etymological origin from the character Mentor in the Odyssey. And Mentor was the teacher and advisor to Odysseus's son, Telemachus, after Odysseus left for the Trojan War. So that's to say that mentorship is an ancient practice, but to be effective, it also must account for contemporary issues. And so I hope that today's discussion will address the current needs of both mentors and mentees within higher education to build the kinds of effective mentorship relationships that Lynn was describing earlier. So I want to start off the conversation by asking each of our faculty panelists to talk about their personal mentoring philosophies and how they've adapted their practices to the current realities of graduate education, which is both the realities of the pandemic, but also the changing nature of what graduate education is for. So I open the floor up to whomever wants to begin with the discussion.
Well, okay, I'll just jump right in. So I would say that basically I see my role as an advocate and a supporter of the students who I advise and who are in my classes. But, you know, as an advocate who's willing to push, who's willing to suggest ways to navigate the institution, and especially to suggest ways to improve scholarship. You know, I believe in sort of giving honest and kind, constructive feedback. But again, let me emphasize the honest part. I think it's really important to be honest at the same time as kind and constructive. And I'd say that my aim is to work with students to accomplish what they want to accomplish, to help them accomplish what they want to accomplish. And that means listening to what they want, which isn't necessarily what I think should be, you know, the topic of their scholarship or whatever. That's really up to the students I work with. And my goal is to help them reach their goals. So, and sometimes, occasionally that means intervening, being a mediator on their behalf, intervening with other faculty members, or back when I was at DGS, intervening with deans, but only if a student requests that kind of mediation. That seems really important to me, to respect a certain kind of, you know, within the law, a certain kind of confidentiality. And you asked about change over time too, about sort of the recent changes. And I would say that more recently, I've been giving more attention to non-academic careers, as we all have, and the possibilities for that, and listening to what it is that students want to do with their lives. And that could mean following a non-academic trajectory after getting a PhD. It could mean dropping out before getting a PhD. I have students who've chosen to forgo the dissertation and go be a labor organizer or go be a high school teacher. And, you know, sometimes they think that they're disappointing me in doing that. And I want to reassure them that it's not a disappointment. I want them to flourish. I want them to do what they want to do. And I want to support them in whatever that is. And whatever they've learned at Yale, you know, that will inform their lives after Yale, whatever the career is. And finally, I would say that I pay more attention now to mental health issues. I think that we're all becoming more aware of just how hard graduate school can be.
I'm happy to follow up. So I try to actually follow and get a read on what the student would like in terms of a mentoring relationship. And I think graduate students are highly idiosyncratic. Some people want a really high touch relationship in which I check in on them regularly, they touch in with me regularly. I think that can be a very effective. Other people can do very well with more kind of formal meetings or check in via email. And if that's their preferred mode of contact, I think that can still work. I think the benefit of a university environment is we can handle all kinds of personalities and preferences for mentoring relationships and also research styles. So I'm a professor in the finance group at Yale SOM. And within the research disciplines of finance, economics, et cetera, we don't really run labs. It's really, there's students with who are doing their independent research projects. They might sometimes co-author with faculty, but they're not tied to any particular faculty member through a laboratory relationship. I think because of that, I try very hard not to be territorial over students. In fact, I really encourage them to find multiple mentors, partly so that they can get multiple points of view. But it also kind of diversifies their risk in terms of what if one faculty member moves or gives advice that ends up not being useful, or let's say a student wants to work on something interdisciplinary, so they really need to make a committee of people with multiple areas of expertise. Matthew had also asked about adapting to modern demands, especially with the pandemic. What I've tried to do is I offer students to meet over Zoom or in my office. Some people actually prefer the convenience of meeting over Zoom. Doesn't require that they're on campus, especially if they have family responsibilities or they're stuck in another country. And I've tried to be more of a listener in terms of their just other problems in their lives. You know, it's important, I think, that I don't probe too much or ask. But a lot of these problems do just come up in conversation. I think it's very useful actually for me to know just the context of these research problems, but then that's in a context of a whole set of issues that my students are dealing with.
Yeah, I guess I can follow suit. So, I'm in the chemistry department, and we work in a lab as a team. So I'll talk more in terms of the mentoring in that kind of an environment. Graduate school is a transition point where you go from being an undergraduate where you take courses and you learn and reiterate things that are in the courses, to independent research where you're blazing your own trail and you're doing independent work, and you're not following directions anymore. And so my goal is to facilitate that, and as Joanne said, to achieve your goals in the end. And that those goals might be to become an academic, or maybe to work in industry, maybe to become a consultant, lots of different directions, go to law school. Those are all directions students from my group have taken. So within a team environment, so one of the things I really work to do is to encourage team efforts and people working together. And that creates a level of interaction and engagement that I think leads to less isolation in a team effort. You're not on your own, you're really working as a team. But on the other hand, everyone has to follow their own path and become independent and learn how to do that. And that's my goal. And encouraging independent ideas. I'm pretty much a hands-off advisor. And so I'm not looking every day, okay, do this next, do that next. But really, we talk as a group every week, many times a week, actually. And it's to brainstorm together and work towards a successful path forward. And so that's my idea of mentorship. And I think the pandemic has certainly made it more difficult for in-person engagement. But on the other hand, it's also by using Zoom as an opportunity to have frequent face-to-face connections. Yeah, one of my challenges is my research group is split. Part of my group is in the chemistry department on main campus, and the rest of my group is on the West Campus and the Energy Science Institute. Yeah, and so it's not always so easy to see each other face to face all the time because you back and forth travel, but Zoom actually makes that a lot easier. So there are some benefits to the transition to Zoom. We'll probably not stop doing that even when things get more back to normal.
Thank you all. That's great. I think there's a clear sense of having a student-centered approach and giving the students independence while either connecting them with resources or enabling them to pursue those resources on their own. That really comes through in all of your answers. There is currently a trend in student affairs to talk about the whole person approach, and that it's impossible to completely separate out our personal and professional lives. And yet, boundaries are necessary to maintain healthy interpersonal interactions across the board. So could you talk a bit about how you maintain healthy relationships with your mentees and what advice you would give students for setting and respecting boundaries with their mentors?
I guess I don't know if we want to follow the same sequence every time, but I'll go this way. We'll break the trend and we can mix it up a little bit. But I was going to mention this before, but please ask questions. I'm more than happy to be interrupted. And if you have any questions you want to follow up or just ask something, please do so. I think Matt's looking at the chat if you want to do that, add something to the chat. So as I mentioned, in a science group, we work as a team, and most of the time that is quite professional. We're working on research, talking about new results, new plans for experiments, and so on. But it also creates kind of a family, and we do things together, and so it's not a complete division between the science that we do and other things outside of the lab as well. So I think that's something that is a good aspect of a team that works in a lab, and that and for example, my own research group, they organized game nights during when we were shut down with COVID, and so we did that on Zoom, and that was fun. And not just actually about a month ago, we had a group ski trip, and so we do some of those kind of things just to foster a team effort, and so. But then, I think everybody has their own personal life, and that's separate. So, separate from the group. So, and that's an important boundary that I think I respect.
Yeah, I would agree that there are definitely boundaries to respect. I think that when I work more one-on-one with people, not in a lab setting, so it's not that sort of same group team building spirit, except in the classroom. And I think that when I was younger, I felt, when I was much younger, I felt more like a friend or a peer with some of my students, with my graduate students, some of whom were actually older than I was way back then. But now I'm older and I feel friendly, but not like a friend. And so I feel it's more of a professional relationship. And, I don't expect to be part of my students' personal lives unless I'm explicitly invited to be, invited to meet a partner or parents or go to a wedding or something like that. So, but mostly professional. And I would say I like to make myself available to meet with advisees and students, but and I'm always happy to go out for coffee or have lunch, but usually that's in a campus setting, not always, but almost always in a campus setting. Again, that sort of professional feeling to it. And I know that there can be a kind of fine line between mentoring and surveillance. And I want to be careful not to cross that line. I don't want anybody to feel like I'm monitoring them or invading their lives. And so really, it's more of expecting students to come to me when they need something from me or want something from me, and to make clear that I'm a presence there for them when they need me, but not a constant presence in their lives.
Yeah, For me personally, this has so far not been much of an issue, although I do have mixed views on this question in general. So personally, I maintain a fairly professional relationship with my mentees. What I've noticed is that after they graduate, we'll continue talking, but then we move toward a less of a professional relationship and we can talk more as colleagues and friends. But that typically happens after graduation when my students get their first jobs. I do have mixed views on this because I know there's research showing that I think the research is about the unequal access to schmoozing and how much schmoozing matters for career advancement. But I do worry that the knee-jerk reaction to this research is then we're just going to ban all channels for schmoozing. So faculty are perhaps not going to be allowed to invite students to their homes for parties, or we can't have meals with students because, well, if we can't offer the same opportunity to all students, then we just shouldn't do it at all. And I'm not sure that's the right way to go. Instead, it really has to be about students have to match with the set of faculty that they choose and they have a good match with. And part of that is through perhaps more informal activities and talking about more than just research. Anyway, so I'm not sure where the right balance is, but I would hope that we don't completely ban or rule out these opportunities as a school.
Well, I think that's super helpful. Building on that, sort of how you approach these relationships and build out these relationships. I think knowing what you want and asking for what you need and knowing the difference between those two things is an essential piece of it. And so negotiation, clear communication, these are the things that are crucial to making that relationship successful. So what advice would you give to students for actually communicating with their mentors effectively, and whether that's in meetings or via email, or how often they should be speaking with their mentors? And I'm thinking also here more broadly than just the faculty advisor to student relationship, right? I think we're getting at something here, which is that you're building a sort of culture around yourself in some of these relationships and figuring out who to ask for when. And so do you all have any advice around sort of how to do that effectively with the communication?
One thing that I tell all my students to do is maybe this applies more for students for which on their dissertations, it's really their job to come up with a completely independent topic, as is the case in finance and economics. What I tell them is when they ask faculty for feedback on research ideas is to ask them really to rank 3 ideas or rank more than one idea. And the idea behind this advice is we would like to give honest feedback, but we also want to be nice and supportive people. So oftentimes if a student just comes to our office with one idea, we're going to try to get as much out of that idea as possible, even if that idea may face various hurdles to publication or job market success. So coming to our office hours or coming to talk to us with 3 possible avenues of research or specialization just allows us to give more honest and helpful feedback.
So I guess if my main piece of advice would be to stay in touch, to don't disappear. So I think that mentors and faculty advisors and professors don't want to feel like we have to chase after you to find out how you're doing. So that may sometimes be that I'll take the initiative and get in touch with people. But generally, I expect students I work with to let me know how they're doing. And I don't mean on a weekly basis or daily basis. I just mean, make sure they're staying in touch and letting me know what's going on in their, not in their personal lives, but in their professional lives, and if need be in their personal lives as well. So if they choose. So I think that staying in touch is, it's not just about coming to someone when you have a problem, although that's a really important thing to do. But I think also to share your triumphs with your professors, to, what are you accomplishing? Where are you? Your mentors want to hear about the hard spots you're having, but, your mentors will take great pride in your accomplishments. I mean, I can't tell you, I feel real joy when one of my students has some great accomplishment, and I want them to let me know. So I guess it's a matter of maintaining a conversation across time, and not again daily, not necessarily weekly, but just staying in touch. I think that's really important when there's a problem and even when there's not.
I guess it's a little bit different in the sciences. It's not that we're not staying in touch. I mean, I meet with everybody in my group every week, multiple times, but I'm not a mind reader, so I don't know what your problems might be, things that you'd like advice on. You have to ask, and so I think setting up meetings and discussing any topic you want. I mean, it could be ranging from a different research direction versus a career pathway, or any aspect in your career development. I can tell you things, but it may not be what you're really concerned about or need advice on. So I think asking, and in my own case, I have before COVID, an open door policy. Now I guess an open contact policy, whether it's a Zoom meeting or an email or what. I think encourage that. As Joanne said, you've got, stay in touch, tell us what you're thinking and what you need, you'd like to, us to give advice on.
I can't help but think about my own time in graduate school, and particularly with what Joanne was saying, where sometimes you have a problem and you don't want to bring it up, and the longer you keep it from the conversation, the worse it gets, and you just kind of build this anxiety around it. And I think that's important what all of you are saying here about just keeping the constant conversation going. We're getting a couple of questions in the chat, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit and sort of encourage those, because we're here to help students think through the questions that they have. So the first question that we received was, I'd love to hear our guest's reflection on advice for students who have co-advisors for a dissertation in situations where they have been a co-advisor. What has worked best for you in this situation? Any tips for students in this situation? We have been sort of thinking about developing a relationship, but sometimes there are multiple people in that relationship, so which adds complication, of course.
I can lead into that because the research we do is very collaborative. And in fact, we've had a collaborative project with several other faculty members in the chemistry department. And so we've had many formally co-advised students, and most of them are informally, but we meet as a team every week. And so, I think it's important to be consistent on what you're saying. When, of course, we may raise questions about interpretations, and maybe that's a little bit different from one advisor to the other, but we have to be consistent in our in our support and advice on that. Otherwise there could be trouble, and so that works. You need to work together on that. But I think it could be I think one thing that facilitates that is that we meet as a team and have roundtable discussion every week, so we can sort of make sure everybody's working in the same direction.
So I do a lot of co-advising. I think probably, I haven't counted, but maybe more than half of the dissertations I've advised here have been co-advised. And I think it's really not problematic. I think it's a great thing. Usually it's, but we're not working in a team in a lab. And so usually an advisee has independent relationships with each of the co-advisors and gets independent feedback from them. And occasionally, sometimes that's nicely reinforcing. We're all saying the same thing. You need to reorganize in this way, and we both say the same thing. And that's great. And sometimes we say different things, and that makes for interesting conversation. And I don't think anybody expects you to sort of favor one or the other, but to follow your own guidance. And if there's conflicting advice, to talk it out and then do what you want to do and what you need to do. So I don't think that it's ever really been a problematic thing. And I think it's nice for somebody to have more than one person who they feel like is their their main advisor, so that there's not just one person who is responsible for giving quick feedback and advice.
Basically, every student that I've advised, it's always been co-advising. That's just kind of the structure of dissertation committees within finance and economics. One problem here is that oftentimes the advisors do ask the students to go in different directions, and then the student is unclear about how to proceed. I think it would really be helpful if the student explained to each advisor how the other advisors are what the other advisors are suggesting. Because one problem that I've seen emerge is, and I've heard this from other faculty members, we'll meet with a student, recommend some direction. A month later, the student hasn't done anything regarding our suggestion. And that actually could be because the other faculty members are suggesting something else. But it'd be really helpful if we understood that, rather than thinking, oh, it's because you've chosen to do nothing over the course of a month. Another strategy that has worked is when the student arranges for an internal presentation, all the dissertation members are present. And this could be done before kind of formally scheduled presentation dates. And that way all the committee members are in one room and can kind of hash out the differences in their suggested directions.
Thank you. There are plenty of questions coming in now, so I'm just going to keep running through them. Could you all speak to the unique challenges and perhaps opportunities and benefits of being a mentor as a tenure track professor as opposed to a tenured professor with more job security? I'm particularly curious about time management, and I'd appreciate any thoughts you have about this. I think this is really important as students are becoming mentors themselves as well and becoming faculty. So.
Yeah, I can maybe jump in on that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of pressure for junior faculty members, to be productive and make a name for themselves and make tenure. And sometimes they put undue pressure on their students. And I think that's something that you have to be careful about. And I think that sometimes can be leading to very difficult arrangements. And I know in my case, that probably was no exception, but I really did try to look into the direction of the student rather than my own, individual interests. But there are realities and demands too, and getting the results for the next grant proposal, and we all work as a team to try to work on that, and sometimes that can be stressful. But I think again, working together as opposed to making demands is a good strategy.
Within my area of finance and economics research, I would say it's unfortunate, but there's just no incentive for junior faculty to be effective mentors or to devote a lot of time to it. Many of them are, but I think that's because they're intrinsically motivated and they just like research and talking about that with students, but there's almost nothing in it for them in terms of higher tenure probability. Because we don't work in labs, mentoring students has no direct benefit to our own research. It's really about, many people do just like to engage with students. And I think as students, you should try to seek out those people. But the way the institution is designed, junior faculty have entirely the wrong set of incentives.
So it's been a long time since I've been a junior faculty member, but I don't recall it being any different in terms of the kind of mentoring I did. There was a sense in which junior faculty sometimes can't be a dissertation advisor. Maybe they can be a co-advisor in some departments, but they can't be the advisor just because of some of the rules we have. And sometimes because graduate students feel closer to people who are closer to their age and develop relationships with them, they sometimes lean on junior faculty in ways as if they're advisors, and then that junior faculty member doesn't get credit for being the advisor because isn't the advisor. So I've heard that from junior faculty members here. So I think, to be careful acknowledge that untenured professors need to protect their research time and might not be getting credit for being dissertation advisors, even though they're offering a kind of mentorship. So I think that's something to be aware of. But I think that actual mentoring, the kinds of mentoring we do, I don't think it's all that different before you have tenure and after you have tenure.
Thank you. I want to throw in a sort of follow-up, which was one of the topics that we had, and it's around sort of building your own mentorship as faculty members and how that's changed over your careers, because I think that's somewhat related to this question, or I'm imagining that this question is partially about students becoming faculty members and then both mentoring graduate students of their own. But I think it's important to remember that mentorship does not exist in graduate school alone, right? And that this is something that will continue to happen. So does anyone want to speak to sort of how you've continued to cultivate these sorts of relationships with colleagues and friends and others?
Yeah, sure. So I'm still in touch with my own dissertation advisor, lo these many decades later, so some of these relationships are lifelong relationships, and that's a good thing. And I'm still in touch with many of my own former graduate students. Again, lifelong relationships in the best scenario, and that's something that. Becomes, as Kelly said before, more personal over time. Is something that might start out as a professional relationship becomes more of a friendship and more of a peer relationship. And that's good to know. And I think that all of us will always be in need of advice and honest, constructive feedback from people. And so the kinds of work that one does as a mentor or a mentee is something that you're always going to want that with other people. So it's not necessarily mentoring once you're, later in life. You don't necessarily call it mentoring, but in some ways it's similar.
Yeah, I can certainly echo that. I've kept in touch with a lot of my former students. In fact, just this semester, I had a couple of students who graduated more than 30 years ago get in touch with me for advice about career moves that they were contemplating, and that's fairly common. That they'll get reach out to ask about this or that. So I think that's a good thing. In fact, lifelong connections are good. I still keep in touch with my own Ph.D. advisor, who's been retired for many years, but I still talk to him and get insight from him occasionally. So yeah, that's definitely important to maintain connections.
One thing I'd add is actually, we were talking about junior professors. One piece of advice I have is after graduating from PhD and getting your first job, especially if that's at an academics institution, it's actually very important as a junior professor to get mentors. And right now, I think I mentor several junior faculty. So our business school recently set up a more formal mentorship program between senior and junior faculty. That started only 2 years ago, and before we didn't have the system set up. So in a place where the system isn't set up, it's really important to go out and find your own people. In a PhD program, usually mentors are assigned to you, you're in a lab, it's just the structure is already there. Whereas once you start your first job, that's when I think it's really on the new professors to go out and find their own network.
I'm going to skip around a little bit because I'm going to try and keep these topically related. But so we got a question that's sort of related to what you were just speaking to, Kelly, which is about actually forming a dissertation committee, but how to approach professors or find the right match, but also following the comment on tenure versus tenure track, should we try to have more senior faculty on our committee? Would you recommend sort of diversifying the committee so that you're getting different voices? I'm reading into this a little bit more, but does anyone want to speak to that?
I didn't mean to imply that junior faculty are not amazing advisors. I was just commenting on the institutional design, which is often they don't have incentives to do this, although they do it anyway. In terms of forming a dissertation committee, I think it really depends on the specific people that you're considering. I think many junior faculty tend to be a little bit more detail oriented. So it actually helps to have some of the younger people on your committee so they can look through kind of specific things that you're doing in your dissertation, your exact research methods, whereas older people might be better at framing or thinking about the big picture. Now, there are many exceptions to this generalization, but that could be why it's useful to have all sorts of people on your committee.
You know, I think it's probably most important to find the people who you need and want to work with. And often that is a mix of junior and senior. You know, given Yale's rules, I think you probably need to have at least one senior person on a dissertation committee. But I think the most important thing is finding who's going to help you accomplish what you want to do. And you figure that out as you're doing your coursework. Sometimes you come to graduate school kind of knowing this is the person I want to work with. And sometimes that is the person you work with, and sometimes it's not. But, you know, as you do your coursework, as you study for your comprehensive exams, as you enter into writing the dissertation, you figure out who are your people. And those are the people you ask. And I don't think it necessarily matters so much about junior and senior. It matters that they're the people who are going to be able to advise you.
Yeah, I can also say I don't think it matters so much about junior and senior, but there are two things that I tell students when they're trying to decide on their committee. One is those are the people who will know you best when you're graduating, and they're the ones who write letters of recommendation for you. So you need to think about, you know, what they might be able to, you know, how they might be able to help you and advise you in your career path. But the other thing is you want people who know the area well enough to be able to give advice. And so if you want to say, well, I want the most famous person on my committee because they'll be able to write the strongest letter, but if they don't know the field very well, they're not a good committee member. So, you know, we have a discussion when a committee is being considered, and, you know, who would you like, and I would give back pros and cons, and so we finally, you know, resolve and come up with a plan for who would be the best committee members.
So there's a question about how to handle difficult situations with mentees, such as social discord with other students, productivity issues. Do you sometimes need to be the bad guy or the bad person in a situation? And I think I would tie this back to also a topic that came up earlier, which is the sort of like honesty of feedback. And so do you all have sort of, I would be open to talking about it as sort of needing to do this work in the best way possible, but also if there are difficult situations that are more sort of take more care to work through.
So yeah, there are a range of situations, and you know, I think it's different for different students in the way I see it, that you know, as I get to know somebody, I get a sense of how much I can push on them, in a sense that some people are really open to being pushed and want me to push them. And some people are, you know, are maybe more sensitive to being pushed. And I take more care with my I'm honest with them all, and I push them all, but some people I can be a little more blunt with than with others. And I think that's a matter of, that's the same, you know, in friendships and with your relatives, you figure out different people have different personalities, and you try to learn to work with them to you know, to be supportive of them in a way that'll work for them. And so it's not always the same, but there are difficult conversations, and sometimes you have to have difficult conversations, and you have to, you know, it's not necessarily pleasant, but you know, you might need to be involved in a difficult conversation, and that's okay.
I guess my thought on this is that the best way to handle this is to avoid it in the first place. So foster, you know, good relationships from the very start, and I think that can oftentimes build a sense of teamwork and collaboration that will make it less likely that will happen. But you know, I think, as Joanne said, sometimes, you know, situations come up, and the best way to approach that is just to be honest and, face up, not to let it fester and get worse.
For some of my students who have had just, the issues can range a full spectrum, but what has been helpful in the past is actually I've suggested a leave of absence. And that's been helpful just to take a break from the university environment. It's actually viewed perhaps better to have a leave of absence when you're searching for a job. It's kind of assumed that it was for personal reasons rather than to have stayed in a PhD program for a very long time without a leave of absence as you're sorting through the same issues. So I found that could be quite helpful. Other than that, I don't view it as my job to be a parent or to dress down a student. So if some student is really just not working hard or having some kind of misbehavior issues, I mean, there's going to be a limit. I might comment on it once, but I'm not going to further dress down a student. I don't view that as my job.
Thank you for that. There's a question about how could we systematically reward good mentorship at this institution? And so we've started talking about this a little bit. Kelly was sort of mentioning this. So how could we do it? And I would also say, what is rewarding about it? As three people who have received this award, there must be some incentive for you personally.
Well, I can say the biggest measure of success I have is how successful the students that have worked with me go on and after they've graduated. And I think that's your legacy. So that's where I would see my reward is the success of the students that worked with me.
Yeah, I agree. It's not really about direct rewards from the university. It's very fun and interesting to talk to students about their research ideas and to guide that process along. And I like to see how their projects develop and where their careers lead. So that's the reward.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what both Gary and Kelly said. And I would also say that I learn a lot from my graduate students. They work on projects that, it's not this lab project where we're all working on the same thing. They work independently on their own projects. And I've learned so much from reading their work and from, I get to help shape a work. I don't have to do all the research. So I love sort of reading their work and helping their work along. And I learn from that. And that's part of the reward for me. The relationships, the lifelong relationships, that's important to me. That's a reward for sure. And then there is the award that we all three got. That was nice too. So there are ways that this is rewarding for sure.
So we sort of answered parts of a question that just came in, but there's a separate piece that builds on what we were just talking about, which is how could we facilitate improving mentorship skills? So I guess my pre-question to that is, what do you think the key skills to being a good mentor are? And then how would you encourage graduate students to sort of build those skills, or faculty members to build those skills?
One of the things I encourage graduate students and postdocs who are working with me is to mentor undergraduates and actually have an experience in mentorship while they're here, and we can work as a team to learn how to do that effectively and gain experience. I think once you go off to become a faculty member, it's not cold. You just have to start learning how to be a mentor at that point. You can build your knowledge as you're going through school.
I guess I would say I would add to that to be open to these kinds of relationships, to listen is really important, to be honest, to be welcoming. Those seem to me things that are important just sort of in general and kind of in life, but I think they work in mentoring relationships.
I never got any training in how to be a mentor. I don't think that's part of it wasn't part of the job search process or part of the PhD program. And I imagine most of my colleagues also didn't get training in how to be a mentor. Here's where I think having talking to multiple faculty members can help. We're all imperfect and we don't have formal training. So it's useful for students, I think, then to piece together what they need across multiple different faculty members.
So we're coming on time, and I know we have a hard stop at 1, but I wanted to offer you all the chance to give sort of any last pieces of advice as graduate students are thinking through their own mentorship philosophies or other things that you wanted to say during this conversation that we just haven't been able to touch on.
Well, I guess I would say that, you are great observers and you can observe your own professors now and your own mentors and advisors now, and that'll help you see what kind of mentor you want to be. You will have people who, have completely different personalities than you do, and maybe their mentoring style wouldn't be your mentoring style, but you will find people who are role models of sorts, I hope, and you'll be able to pick up things from them and learn how you might pay it forward. I know I learned a lot from my own dissertation advisor. I just celebrated her retirement last month out in California. And I know I learned a lot from her, but she's a different personality. And I had to figure out what is my own style of mentoring. And I did that partly by observing other people and partly by knowing myself and knowing what works for me.
I can say that I agree with that you learn by observing. And in my case, when I started out, there were no mentoring programs. We never had any formal mentorship. I don't think that was even talked about in those days. But now that's been put in place, which is a great thing. But that's not all there is. You can reach out to people who can provide advice. There's both formal and informal mentoring, and in fact, informal mentoring might even be, in many cases, the most useful for career directions. If you find somebody who is, has a career path or ideas that help best fit with what yours, reach out, and those kinds of informal mentoring can be really useful.
I just like to echo something I think Joanne said about checking in often with your mentors. I think this can be very useful, especially because students in the beginning are concerned, I think, about making a good impression. And that leads to stress that actually leads them to just not meet up with us at all until they have made significant progress on their dissertation. And I think that's unfortunate because that can lead to a lot of wasted effort in various directions. And actually, by checking in with us frequently, that actually allows us to update our beliefs. So one meeting in which you didn't have your work done, is absolutely fine as long as you check with us, regularly in future months and throughout the year, and we can see the progress of the project.
Great. Well, I want to thank you all for your incredibly wise and judicious advice today, and just for being so gracious with your time and insights. And I also want to thank everyone who participated in the conversation with the questions through the chat. I should say that we do intend to post the recording of the conversation on YouTube, so we'll get that link out to folks soon. And yes, thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.